I still remember the first time I saw Blackwell Manor. It rose from the heart of Surrey like something out of an old English legend. Endless marble steps, iron gates, wrapped in ivy, windows so tall they seemed to pierce the clouds. The air itself felt different there, thicker, charged, as if the house was alive and watching. My cab stopped at the main entrance. Beyond the fountain, a man in uniform waited for me. "Miss Clark?" he asked, bowing slightly. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound composed. He took my luggage with a nod. "Mr. Blackwell is expecting you." Mr. Blackwell. The name alone carried weight, whispered across London's elite like a secret everyone wanted to share. People called him the Alpha King, a title that wasn't official but felt earned. He built empires from dust, turned rivals into allies, and ruled the city's underworld of wealth with quiet, terrifying grace. And I was here because his company had hired me a communications advisor for the Blackwell Foundation. At least, that's what the letter said. The truth was, I didn't quite know why he had requested me personally. Inside, the manor glowed with golden light. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations. Portraits of stern ancestors watched from the walls. Everything was precise, not a single cushion out of place, not a sound beyond the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock. Then I saw him. Elias Blackwell, the Alpha King himself. He stood by the fireplace, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in the quiet confidence of someone used to command. His hair was silvering slightly at the temples, not from weakness, but from experience. His gaze, when it found mine, was sharp enough to still my breath. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice deep, deliberate. "Welcome to my home." I managed a polite smile. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Blackwell." He motioned toward the grand staircase. "My son will be joining us shortly. He handles most matters of the foundation these days." His son. I'd read about him. Of course, Adrian Blackwell, heir to the empire. A man as infamous for his brilliance as for his defiance. Tabloids painted him as untamable, racing through London in the dead of night, vanishing for weeks, appearing at galas with women no one could name twice. I wasn't sure what I expected when he appeared. Maybe arrogance, maybe charm. But not this. Adrian walked down the staircase like he owned every breath in the room. And maybe he did. His suit was half-buttoned, his tie forgotten, his hair slightly tousled, that careless kind of perfection only men born into power could afford. When his eyes met mine, I felt the air shift. "So you're the new hire," he said, voice smooth but edged. I was expecting someone older. I almost smiled. Disappointed, he studied me a moment longer. "Not quite." His father cleared his throat, reminding us both where we were. "Adrian will show you around the estate. You'll be working closely together from tomorrow." "Of course," Adrian said, his gaze never leaving me. "Closely." As we walked through the hallways, the silence between us was thick. I tried to focus on the detail, the art, the chandeliers, the smell of cedarwood and smoke, but I could feel his presence beside me like heat. "You don't talk much," he said finally. "Neither do you. Touch." He stopped at a balcony overlooking the gardens. From here, the whole estate stretched into the horizon. Glass houses, stables, fountains reflecting the fading sun. "It's beautiful," I said softly. He leaned against the railing, watching me instead of the view. "It gets lonely, when you grow up knowing everyone wants something from you." There was a vulnerability in his tone that didn't match the headline. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the faint tiredness behind his charm. The son of the Alpha King, surrounded by everything money could buy, and yet something missing. Before I could reply, he tilted his head, a small, teasing smile touching his lips. "Are you going to keep staring, Miss Clark?" My cheeks warmed. "Maybe I'm just trying to figure you out." "Good luck," he murmured, stepping closer. Most people spend years trying. That night, I couldn't sleep. From my window, I could see the faint glow of the east wing, his wing. I imagined him there, pacing, thinking, maybe looking out into the same. Somewhere deep inside, something dangerous stirred. I had come to Blackwell Manor for a job, but the moment Adrian looked at me, I knew I was already in too deep. The dining room of the manor glimmered like a world outside of time. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above a table long enough to seat a kingdom. Golden cutlery caught the candlelight, and the faint scent of wine and polished oak lingered in the air. It was the kind of place where whispers carried weight, where every word felt rehearsed, and silence itself demanded attention. I sat near the end of the table, pretending not to notice him watching me. The son of the Alpha King, calm, impossibly composed, wearing his confidence like it had been tailored along with his suit. His gaze held the sort of quiet authority that made people listen before he even spoke. Dinner was almost over. The servants had cleared the plates, leaving behind half-empty glasses of Bordeaux and the echo of polite conversation. But beneath the surface, beneath the laughter and the murmured talk of business and politics, something else lingered. Something unspoken. A tension I couldn't quite name. When I finally looked up, our eyes met. Just for a moment. But that moment felt longer than it should have. He didn't look away. I felt it, that dangerous awareness, that sudden pull in my chest. It was absurd, really. I had been in the presence of power before, old men with money, influence, titles, yet none of them had ever made me forget where I was. He did, with nothing more than a look. When the guests began to leave, I rose, murmured my goodbyes and stepped away from the table. The air in the corridor was cooler, scented faintly with cedar and candle wax. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor as I passed the portraits of kings and conquerors. Each pair of painted eyes seemed to follow me. Then, I heard him. Leaving already. His voice came from behind me, low, steady, with that hint of amusement I'd noticed earlier. I turned. He stood a few paces away, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of wine. The soft light from the chandelier above him cast shadows across his face, sharpening the edges of his jaw. I thought the night was over, I said quietly. For most people, perhaps. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes echoing softly on the floor. But you're not like most people, are you? I don't know what you mean, don't you? His tone was calm, but there was something underneath, curiosity, or maybe challenge. You've been looking for something all evening. I saw it in your eyes. I wanted to laugh, to deny it, but the truth was, I wasn't sure what I had been looking for. Perhaps it was distraction. Perhaps it was danger. He came closer, still not enough to touch, but enough for me to feel the heat of his presence. The air between us changed. It felt thicker, heavier, filled with words neither of us dared to speak. You shouldn't be here, he said softly. Then why are you? I asked. He smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that knew its own effect. Maybe I wanted to see if you'd stay. And then, for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The ticking clock in the corridor, the soft hum of the storm outside, everything faded until it was only him and the pull that neither of us tried to resist. He took another step closer. My breath caught. You make it difficult to think, I whispered. Good, he murmured, his voice almost a growl. Thinking ruins everything. The storm outside had grown louder, a dull murmur rolling above the roof. Inside the corridor, the light from the chandeliers flickered over marble and shadow, turning the air into something golden and unreal. I could hear the faint sound of violins from the drawing room. Someone had forgotten to turn off the music. He walked beside me now, no more than an arm's length away. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was alive, humming like a current that neither of us could name. Does the manor always feel this empty? I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked around, his expression unreadable. It isn't emptiness, he said. It's quiet. My father likes quiet. It reminds him he's still in control and you. He stopped at the base of the staircase. Control is overrated. His words lingered, heavy and deliberate. I met his gaze again, and for the first time I saw something that didn't fit the polished surface he wore so well. We reached the landing. The hall above us stretched into darkness, lined with portraits and silver-framed mirrors. A fire burned at the far end, its light catching on the glass. He set his glass of wine on the banister. Do you believe in instinct, Amelia? The sound of my name from his lips startled me. Instinct, yes. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. That moment when you stop listening to reason and simply act. I swallowed. It depends on what the instinct is, he smiled faintly. And if the instinct tells you to do something reckless, then I'd hope I'm wise enough to ignore it. You don't strike me as someone who ignores things easily. There was a pause. The firelight shimmered against his eyes, dark, unreadable, pulling me in. I felt my pulse quicken, betraying me. He noticed. Of course he did. You see, he whispered, that's what I mean. I should have walked away then. I should have turned down the corridor, thanked him for the evening, and left the manor before the night swallowed me whole. But instead, I stayed. Tell me something, he said suddenly. What did you expect when you came here tonight? I hesitated. I'm not sure. Everyone who comes to this house expects something, he said. Favor, fortune, attention. He studied me. But not you. The words unsettled me, as though he could see through the layers I'd so carefully built. I came because your father invited me, I managed. Did he? His smile was slight, but his eyes said otherwise. Or did you come because you wanted to see what kind of people rule this world? I opened my mouth to answer, but he moved closer, so close that I could feel the heat from the faint scent of smoke and cedar clinging to his shirt. My breath caught again. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The space between us was charged enough to burn. Careful, he murmured, his voice brushing against the edge of my composure. The manor remembers every secret. A flicker of lightning lit the window. For an instant, the world outside vanished, and all that remained was him, the son of the Alpha King, the heir to power and ruin, standing far too near. I wanted to speak, to tell him to stop, to ask him what he meant. But the words never came. He leaned in, not enough to close the distance, just enough to make it unbearable. Tell me you don't feel it, he said softly. Either word caught in my throat. His eyes searched mine, patient and certain. Exactly, he whispered. The thunder outside broke again, shaking the glass. I stepped back instinctively, my hand brushing the banister for balance. He didn't move, only watched, the ghost of a smile on his lips. Good night, Amelia, he said finally, his voice returning to calm authority. Before either of us forget what's wise. And just like that, he turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving me alone in the golden quiet. The hall felt colder after he left. I stood there for what felt like minutes, the silence pressing against my chest. The last flicker of the fire cast shadows that danced along the walls, stretching and fading like restless ghosts. I should have gone home. That was the sensible thing to do. But sense had a strange way of dissolving inside that house. I walked back through the corridor, the sound of my heels muted against the carpet. The portraits of his ancestors loomed over me, kings, warriors, men who'd built empires out of blood and ambition. And somewhere among them, I imagined his face fitting perfectly, proud, beautiful, and dangerously unreadable. At the foot of the stairs, a servant appeared silently, bowing his head. Your car will be ready in a few minutes. Miss, thank you, I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. I waited near the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the reflection of the chandeliers behind me. Outside, the gates of the manor stood their iron curves glistening beneath the wet light. Then, faint footsteps. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. You left your shawl, he said quietly. I turned. He was standing at the end of the hallway, holding the thin fabric in his hand. It was such a simple thing, a piece of silk, and yet, in his grasp, it felt like something far more deliberate. Thank you, I managed, reaching for it. But when I did, his fingers brushed mine. It wasn't much, barely a touch, yet it felt as if the air itself held its breath. Neither of us spoke. There was no need to. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. You don't understand what this place does to people, he said softly. Maybe not, I replied. But I'm beginning to. For a long moment, we simply stood there. The storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle, and the world beyond those walls seemed impossibly distant. He took a step closer, just enough for his voice to fall low. My father built this house to remind everyone of his power, he said. But all I see when I walk these halls is how easily people lose themselves in it. I held his gaze. And you? He smiled faintly. I'm still deciding. Another silence stretched between us, the kind that felt dangerous to break. Then, as if sensing I was about to step away, he reached out. Not to stop me, not quite, just enough for the back of his hand to brush again. The briefest, deliberate and fragile. Something inside me shifted. I should have moved. I didn't. His voice dropped to a whisper. Good night, Amelia. It was the way he said my name, soft, careful, as though he were trying to memorize it. He handed me the shawl, and our fingers met once more. And that was all it took. The moment shattered whatever illusion of distance we had both been clinging to. I turned away before he could see it in my face, the truth I could no longer hide, that I wanted to understand him, even if it meant losing myself a little. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me cold, clean, sobering. But when I looked back at the manor, its windows burning softly against the rain, I knew I hadn't left it at all. Part of me was still inside. The carriage ride back to my flat was a blur of streetlights and wet cobblestones. London in the rain held a quiet majesty, but tonight it felt distant, almost irrelevant. My thoughts were consumed by him, by that presence that had shadowed every step of my evening. I tried to reason with myself. He was the son of the Alpha King, powerful, untouchable, surrounded by wealth and he moved through the world like a predator in silk gloves, and yet he had noticed me, not just seen me, but acknowledged something in me, something I hadn't known existed. The memory of our fingers brushing lingered like a spark in my chest, a trivial touch in any other context. But here, in that house, it had been electric. I found myself replaying his words. You don't understand what this place does to people. And again, I'm still deciding. What could he possibly be deciding? And why did it feel as though his decision might determine my own fate? The carriage came to a gentle stop outside my flat. The driver waited silently as I stepped down, the shawl clutched around my shoulders. The rain had tapered into a soft drizzle, leaving a silver mist over the street. I hesitated at the door. Part of me wanted to return, to step back into the golden glow of the manor, to let the evening unravel further. But reason, fragile and persistent, whispered that I should stay away. Yet even as I whispered those cautions, another part of me, deeper, warmer, rebelled. That part wanted more tension, more discovery, more of him. I entered my flat and shut the door, leaning against it for a moment, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The room was quiet, safe, familiar, and yet It felt smaller, dimmer, somehow incomplete. I poured myself a glass of wine, letting the ruby liquid catch the light from the lamp above. I told myself it was to calm my nerves. Perhaps it was. But more honestly, it was to give me something to focus on while my mind read every second of the manor, the scent of cedar and smoke, the soft echo of his footsteps, the weight of his gaze, and the way his presence had made the air itself feel impossibly charged. The thought made me shiver, not with fear exactly, not with regret, but with an ache I could neither name nor fully understand. And then, as I sipped the wine, a realization settled over me, one that both frightened and exhilarated. He had noticed me in a way no one else ever had. He had sought me out, and in that pursuit, he had left an imprint on me that would not fade. The night stretched on. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts turned to him repeatedly, each memory sharper than the last. The quiet corridors of the manor, the glint of his eyes and the chandelier light, the way he had drawn near and then pulled away, leaving a space charged with anticipation. It was maddening, intoxicating, and I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that this was only the beginning. Somehow, some way, our paths would cross again, and when they did, nothing would be the same, because desire, once sparked, refuses to be extinguished. The following morning, London stirred to life beneath a pale, brittle sun. The streets shimmered with dew, and the distant hum of carriages and early commuters filled the air. Yet despite the city's energy, I felt detached, as though a veil had settled over the world, a veil woven from the memory of last night, heavy and insistent. I dressed carefully, each movement deliberate, as if I could armor myself against the thoughts that relentlessly returned. The son of the Alpha, the heir to a fortune and a family legacy that dwarfed the most ambitious of men. And yet, in the shadows of that grandeur, there had been an undeniable humanity, sharp, magnetic, unsettlingly close to desire. The day passed in a blur of mundane distractions, meetings, errands, the trivial noise of life. But beneath it all, my mind traced every detail of our encounter. The way he had moved in the manor, the precise control in his steps, the quiet authority that had made even the chandeliers seem to bow in his presence. By evening, I found myself drawn once again to the city's lights, not by appointment, not by obligation, but by something far less rational, a pull I could neither name nor deny. I returned to the streets near the manor, careful to remain unseen. From the curve of the road, I glimpsed the grand facade, bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps. It looked almost surreal, like a vision from another time, a palace, a fortress, and a cage all at once. I lingered, aware that my own heartbeat seemed louder than it had any right to be. And then he appeared, not through the doorway, not announced, but emerging from the shadows of the manor's courtyard. His figure was impossibly still, yet alive with quiet force. The rain from earlier had left traces on his coat, dark streaks that only seemed to enhance the sculpted lines of his silhouette. Our eyes met across the distance. I should have looked away. I should have fled. And yet, I remained. "You return early," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the cobblestones. I needed some air, I admitted, feeling the faint tremor in my own tone. He took a step closer, the gravel crunching beneath his polished shoes. "Or perhaps you needed to see me again," he suggested, almost as a question, almost as a certain. I couldn't answer. Truthfully, I didn't want to. The space between us closed, yet the air seemed to thrum, charged with anticipation. Every instinct urged me to resist, yet every fiber of my being rebelled. "I don't usually speak to guests after midnight," he murmured, his lips curling faintly, knowingly. "And I don't usually linger in courtyards. I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, not fully, but enough to make my pulse quicken. Tonight is not usual, Amelia. Nothing about tonight is usual. His words were deliberate, slow, like a promise wrapped in shadow. I wanted to step closer, to reach out, to let the warmth of him erase the chill that had settled over me. And yet, I stayed where I was. You should leave before someone notices, he said. This place is not forgiving to those who linger, I think. I might linger anyway, I admitted, and my own confession startled me more than it did him. A faint laugh escaped him, soft, warm, unrestrained by the walls that demanded composure. Bold, he said, taking a step nearer. Or foolish. Perhaps both. The distance between us narrowed again. The night held its breath. The city outside seemed to pause, as if aware of the tension gathering like a storm about to break. I don't want to be bold, I whispered. I just can't stop myself. He tilted his head, studying me. And yet, he said, low, deliberate, you've already begun. It was true. I had begun, though neither of us had time. I had begun to desire the world he embodied, the danger, the power, the impossible, a law of being seen by someone who could command it all. The night stretched on, taut and electric, and in that tautness, we both understood a truth neither would voice aloud. Once the pull had begun, there was no turning back. The manor loomed behind me, silent and imposing, as I lingered on the steps leading to the courtyard. The drizzle had returned, coating the cobblestones in a reflective sheen. It was as though the world itself conspired to heighten the tension between us. Damp, cold, yet impossibly. He emerged from the shadows, smooth as silk, his coat damp at the edges, but his composure untouched. The way he moved, careful, measured, betrayed nothing, yet every step pulled the air taut around us. You shouldn't be here, I said softly, though I knew the words were empty. Neither should you, he replied, a faint smile playing across his lips. And yet, here you are. I felt the pull again. The magnetic tension that had shadowed our encounter in the dining hall was now undeniable, almost suffocating. My pulse raced and every rational thought seemed to falter under the weight of his presence. You do this deliberately, don't you? I whispered, my voice barely audible above the rain. Do what? His eyes glimmered in the lamplight, dark and unreadable. Draw me in, I said, and leave me hanging on every word, every look, every step you take. He laughed softly, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Amelia, you don't know the half of it. We stood close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. The air between us was thick with unspoken promises, possibilities that dared not be named aloud. And yet, the pull, the desire, the undeniable tension was electric. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from my face. The gesture was so gentle, so fleeting, yet it made the heat in my chest flare with something I could not control. I should step back, he said softly, as though testing his own restraint. And miss this? I asked, voice low, challenging. I don't think so. His gaze held mine, unwavering, consuming. It was no longer a game of polite glances or measured words. Every fiber of my being ached to bridge the space between us. You're dangerous, I whispered, almost to myself. Not nearly as dangerous as you, he countered, his tone low, deliberate. You tempt me in ways I cannot resist. The night seemed to lean in around us, the manor looming silently, the rain murmuring against the stone. It was as though the world itself waited for what would come next. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to surrender to the pull. And yet, the knowledge of his power, his position, the weight of his world, made the temptation sharper, almost forbidden. You're impossible, I breathed. And yet, he murmured, you keep coming back. That's what makes it exquisite. We stood there, on the wet cobblestones, suspended in a moment that promised far more than either of us dared to admit. Every breath, every heartbeat, every glance was charged with longing and restraint. I realized, in that instant, that this was not merely an attraction. This was a collision of worlds, my ordinary life, and his empire of influence, control, and hidden desire. And despite every warning, every hesitation, I knew I would not walk away, because desire, once awakened, refuses to be tamed. The city lights of London stretched like rivers of gold across the skyline, visible through the massive windows of the penthouse. I had never imagined a place could feel both terrifying and intoxicating. It was his world, polished, untouchable, filled with treasures and secrets I could barely comprehend. He was there, waiting, leaning against the marble balcony. His presence dominated the room as effortlessly as the skyline outside. Even from across the space, I felt the pull, a gravity I could not resist. "You came," he said, his voice a low rumble that made my skin tighten. "I had to," I replied, aware of the tremor in my own voice. The distance between us shrank almost imperceptibly, and with each step, the air thickened with something dangerous: desire, power, anticipation. He reached out, brushing my cheek lightly. The touch was electric, sending warmth rushing through me, igniting every nerve. "You shouldn't play with me like this," I murmured, half warning, half confession. "I'm not the one playing," he said softly, his gaze fixed on mine. "It's you, Amelia. You tempt me. You've tempted me from the moment I saw you." I swallowed hard. The words were simple, yet they hit with a force that left me breathless. Every carefully constructed barrier I had built around myself dissolved under the weight of his. He moved closer, until I could feel his breath, the subtle heat of his body brushing mine. I was acutely aware of every line, every shadow, every whispered pulse of control and the dangerous invitation it carried. "You know what you do to me?" he asked, his voice low, nearly a whisper. "I think I do," I said, my own lips trembling with the truth I had barely admitted to myself. And then, in a motion both deliberate and inevitable, he captured my lips. It was not gentle, but not harsh. It was a claim, a demand, and an offering all at once. The kiss was intense, electric, a collision of desire that left me weak in his arms. He pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes dark with intent. "Do you understand what this means?" I don't know," I confessed, breathless, heart pounding. "It means," he said slowly, trailing a hand down my arm, "that nothing will ever be the same." The night outside continued, indifferent to the storm of heat and tension inside the room. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word pulled me deeper into his world, a world where power and desire were inseparable, and where I had willingly surrendered every ounce. We moved through the penthouse as though guided by an invisible current. The rooms, the art, the luxury all faded into the background, leaving only the intensity between us. He stopped in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The city spread below us like a glittering kingdom. And there, in the privacy of his empire, he claimed me once more, not just in touch, but in gaze, in intent, in every unspoken word. I realized then, fully, that the son of the Alpha King was no longer just a man. He was a force, a storm, a temptation I could not resist. And I wanted it all: the danger, the heat, the forbidden pull. The night was far from over, and we were just beginning to explore the shadows of our desire. The penthouse was silent except for the soft hum of the city below. Outside, London glittered, oblivious to the storm of emotion inside these walls. He stood behind me now, close enough that I could feel his warmth, his power, and the weight of his presence pressing against my back. His hands traced my shoulders slowly, deliberately, as though memorizing every inch of me. "You belong here," he whispered, his breath brushing my ear. "With me?" I shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his claim. I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice trembling, betraying the longing I could no longer hide. He pressed closer, his lips grazing my neck, a teasing, dangerous trail that made every nerve ignite. "You can," he said softly, "and you will, because you want it. You've always wanted." I turned slowly in his arms, searching his eyes for some trace of hesitation, but there was none, only dark, unwavering desire. He captured my lips again, this kiss deeper, more consuming than the first. His hands moved lower, gliding with intent over the curve of my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. Every touch was a command, every glance a promise. My body responded instinctively, giving in to the pull I had resisted for far too long. "You're mine," he murmured, the words both possessive and intoxicating. "I am," I breathed back, surrendering to the magnetism between us. Hours passed like minutes. Every touch, every caress, every whispered word became a rhythm, a seductive dance of power and desire. The penthouse transformed into a sanctuary where nothing else existed. Not the world outside, not the weight of society, not even fear. Only us. And then, as dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in hues of rose and gold, we collapsed together, bodies entwined, hearts racing, breaths mingling. I lay in his arms, feeling the reality of it all, the power, the intensity, the sheer luxury of being with someone who could command the world yet chose to want me. He pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. "You've changed everything," he said quietly, almost reverently. "And you've changed me," I whispered back, knowing it was true. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was full of everything we had shared: tension, passion, surrender, and the unspoken promise that this was only the beginning. The finality of the night did not feel like an end. It felt like a threshold, a beginning of something intense, dangerous, and irrevocably ours. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel it all: the thrill, the lust, the love, the fear, and the reckless abandon. Because in his arms, under the London sky, I had finally found where I belonged. And for the first time, I didn't want to leave.